I would like to call to order the May 6, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting for Oregon City Council. The time is 7:30 PM, and I ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Folks, we'll move right into the meeting. There is no requirement for attendance for council members at a Committee of the Whole meeting. However, have the record note that all council members are here this evening. In addition, we have Mayor Michael Safarian, City Administrator Joel Mazer, Clerk of Council Cassie Rawson, Public Service Director Paul Roman, Chief of Police Brandon Began, Assistant Chief of Police Ryan Spangler, Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien, Assistant Chief Mark Mullins, Finance Director Nick Roman, Parks and Recreation Commissioner Tim Borton, Building and Zoning Commissioner Stephen Schrake. Moving into the agenda, first thing we have for this evening is persons and delegations. We do have 4 individuals signed in to speak tonight. Before we start, folks, I would ask that we do try to keep ourselves to 3 to 5 minutes. At some point in time, around 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes, you'll get a wave from Ms. Rawson just to let you know. We're just going to ask you to start wrapping up. We're not going to buzz anybody or bounce you out. We do just want to give everybody an opportunity to address council and the administration this evening. So with that said, first person we have signed in is Tom Lambert. And Tom will ask you to come forward, state your name and your address for the record, please.
Tom Lambert, 5238 Seaman Road. I am here today representing the Memorial Day Committee that does the stuff at the high school on Memorial Day. I was tasked with finding out about Jack Coy, Staff Sergeant Jack Coy, World War II veteran, killed in action over Germany. I want to thank Joel, Paul, Steve, and Beth, and Keith Henniger. They have all been fantastic, helping me out, getting things done. We have banners on the way that are going to go up all over the city. There'll be 2 out here in front of the city building with the flag, and then the rest will be all over. I put badges in front of most of you. I got more to give you. Dennis, I forgot you. I apologize. So I just want to thank you guys for the cooperation with this. It's been in the donations from, and this is all donations from private citizens and the VFW and things like that. So no city money is being used on the banners for Jack Coy. Now, the city was gracious enough to buy the flag banners that are going to go up alongside those, the Jack Coy banners. But all of our stuff has been purchased by donations. And the other thing is, I know that we're putting up all Jack Coy banners, and we're not trying to take away from any other veteran who lost their lives in war. I'm sorry. We're just celebrating the homecoming of this war hero. That's what we're doing. So I'm pretty passionate about this. So that's what we're doing. So thank you very much for your help.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Certainly appreciate the work that you and the group are doing into this as well. And we do, of course, appreciate all our veterans, especially as Memorial Day comes up. It brings them first and foremost to our memories, but I would encourage us all to make sure that the other 364 days of the year, we're thinking of them as well. So thank you for your efforts, Mr. Lambert. Next person I have is Shawnell Johns. And Ms. Johns, we'll just ask you to state your name and your address for the record, please.
Shawnell Johns, 5759 Eagles Landing Drive. And I just want to say as a personal thank you to the city council, everyone here, and everyone who's been helping with my great uncle Jack Coy. It's amazing that after 80 years, he gets to finally come home and be at rest with his family here. And there's so many people that have been reaching out, helping, wanting to be a part of this. And it's just absolutely wonderful. And I can't say enough for everyone. And my biggest thing is I wanted this to start with Jack, but it's not going to end with Jack. We have so many other lost soldiers out there that are finally going to come home. And I want people to know this, that don't ever give up. They're going to be found and they're going to come home. You know, it's just with the technology that we have today in DNA samples, this is how he's coming home, is from the DNA that my mother and I submitted after all these years. And I'm just so grateful. And I'm like, I just want to spread the word that, like I said, it may start with Jack right now, but it certainly isn't going to end with Jack. We just need to keep remembering all the ones, they're still out there and they're going to come home. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Reeds.
thanks. Mrs. Johnson, if John's, I'm sorry, I'm hearing impaired and I apologize. What time is the memorial service at Clay High School? Could you, I mean, I know I do know it, but I want others to.
Right. Well, we actually had planned a rather large event for the whole weekend. Saturday, we are going to do from 1 to 3 at Clay High School, a visitation service. And at 3 o'clock, I guess there's going to be a special honors to the family from the veterans. And Sunday at Willow Cemetery at noon is when the military service and his burial will be. And then, of course, on Monday, the special memorial service at the stadium and a special, mention of Jack and, of course, everyone else.
And what time is that on?
That would be
Monday?
at 11 on Monday.
Thank you so much. I
Yes.
greatly appreciate it.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Reeds. And I would ask Ms. Rawson as well to make sure that you add that to the website and the information that you send out to council members, so we may be able to share that out. Again, thank you for all the efforts and time to go into that. So next person we have is Mike Lutheran. Mike, again, we'll ask you to state your name and your address for the record, please.
My name is Mike Lutheran. I live at 2742 Randall. There's a couple up here that will probably recognize my address. By instance, we've had last month's meeting, I believe, was on the international codes. Somebody had commented on the committee that neighbors would use these codes to perpetuate their war with other neighbors. We've been in our house 25 years. 20 of those years, without fail, we've had a city department called on us. I've had the building inspector out. I've had zoning out several times. I've been in front of city council. And I guess, well, Friday, there was another city vehicle in their driveway, so I'm sure we're going to start again this year. And my question on these codes are, do they apply to only new buildings or existing buildings? Because I can tell you now, they will use these.
Yeah.
And we'll be having several agencies out again.
They would apply to all buildings. I don't really think there's much in the way of grandfather clausing in with the IRC's property maintenance codes. I can assure you that's been a rather significant discussion of those of us kind of serving in a committee talking through this over the last several months. Is we understand full well this puts a weapon in the arsenal for those that have whatever grievance against a neighbor or somebody else within the city. Our internal discussions are trying to minimize the use of that in that manner as best as to our ability. There's obviously always going to be a requirement to follow up or follow through.
Sure.
But the idea of discretion, administrative discretion, and just understanding the difference is something I think you see a lot of heads nodding as are sitting around here, because we've talked rather extensively about this. We want to put this into place to give us an opportunity for improving the overall aesthetics, looks, and operations of our community. We don't want to make this a bat to hand one neighbor against another.
Yeah.
And certainly I hope that you'll find that that's going to be exactly the case.
I'm sure we're not the only one. There has to be more
Very true.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luther. Last person I have here this evening is Robert Stewart. And again, sir, we'll ask you to state your name and your address for the record, please.
Robert Stewart, 610 North Stadium Road. A little bit, most people know who I am. As a commander right now of 4906 VFW, 5 years commander of Vietnam Veterans of America, Northwest Ohio. Been a commissioner in the county and the state for the Veterans Service Commission, formed the Department of Veteran Affairs in 2007 within 4 weeks from an office to a cabinet level position. Will not take a penny, nickel, or dime away from a widower for the veteran on my watch. While I'm here today, I was informed about the remains of a 20-year-old kid shot down over Germany, bombing a Messerschmitt factory. 12 planes left. His commanding officer was Colonel Jimmy Stewart. Actually cried when only one plane made it back. As a disabled, 100% disabled combat veteran from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, it breaks my heart. A lot of my brothers did not come home. And since that time, a lot of brothers and sisters didn't come home. I realized we have a chance to bring a brother home, to get the homecoming that I never got. Our motto, the Vietnam Veterans of America, says, "Never again shall another generation be treated like we were." So I stepped up and within a week raised over $3,500 to make this happen, to honor him properly. And this couldn't be done without you ladies and gentlemen up here be on board with this, especially those that step up and be a part of the committee. Mr. Drake, stand there and say, hey, we're going to do this. Police officer sitting over here, I spoke at Memorial Day a couple of years ago, and the chief of police said, Bob, would you speak for the police and the fireman memorial? His sergeant walked up and said, Chief, what does an infantryman know about police and fireman stuff? I said, excuse me, Chief, I got this. You know what a police officer and a fireman have in common to an infantryman? When everybody else is running out, we're running in. Same thing said for Jack Coy as a tail gunner over Germany. His two buddies got blown out of the plane and watched the plane crashed in Germany. When America won, they took the remains over to Belgium. And through the grace of DNA, they actually found out who he was. And at one time, I was listed MIA, presumed KIA, escaping, evading myself, servicing my own wounds. I don't know what the family feels. I know what my mom went through. She was going crazy because we just lost our sister to cancer at 18 years old, only a year and a half before that. But I really want to say to you, I'm on board with this, and I'm so glad that you are. And the police, I honor you, gentlemen. I want you to know we got your six at all times. Thank you very much for listening to me. And normally I talk a lot. It's time to shut up. Just know this, we do not leave our own.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Again, appreciate not only your service, but your time and committed into this. Certainly a well worth cause, and appreciate everybody being here this evening. That said, we'll move into the agenda for this evening, folks. We will start with item 79 of 2024, which is presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Fire Chief Clayton O'Brien. And I believe, Chief, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is an ordinance that will allow us to enter an agreement with the ODNR. And what this does is we respond to ODNR, which wildfires or any sort of natural vegetation fires, and they have a portal where we would report those so they can keep track of these fires and the acres and such. In addition to doing that, that's essentially our part. This allows us also opportunities to apply for grants through the ODNR as well.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. Anything else from the administration on item 79? None? Council, any questions on item 79 of 2024? Hearing none, council, I'll seek a motion to move item 79 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Paulo.
so moved.
Thank you, Ms. Paulo.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Solander. We have a motion by Ms. Paulo, seconded by Mr. Solander to move item 79 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 79 of 2024 is moved to next week's agenda. Next item is item 80. Again, we'll go to the chief.
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance here is to allow us to apply for the port security grant. This is an annual grant that comes out, and we have had some recent changes on the waters with the U.S. Coast Guard and their and what they cover and what their assistance is going to be. Made us relook at what kind of services that we have. Our current boat, our current rescue boat that we do have is greater than 20 years old. It is undersized and underserved for what we need. This is a grant that will give us the opportunity to apply for a new rescue boat. This grant does have a 25% match. And we are currently in the process, if allowed, to apply for the grant. We're also in the process of speccing a boat. But look for a price that wouldn't be more than 300,000. So it'd be 25% if we were successful in this grant. 25% of that.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. Anything from the administration add on? No? Okay. Council, any questions on item 80? Hearing, oh, please, Ms.
Sorry.
Ackerman?
Couldn't get my, what is the area that you would utilize that boat in? People ask me, well, we've got Coast Guard and we've got, this group, that group, that responds. What area would that protect?
Mr. President, Ms. Ackerman, we actually cover 5 square miles of the water currently right now, which would be Maumee Bay and then out into Lake Erie. We do also have automatic aid agreements with Jerusalem Township where they help cover us, we help cover them. And as far as the recent changes with the Coast Guard, they used to have, they have personnel at the Toledo station. However, just recently, their Toledo station coverage will only be there for what they call scheduled mission station. That's a drastic change of what it used to be. A scheduled mission station will only be where there'll only be individuals there for training purposes or different events that they would be on the water to cover for. So essentially our search and rescue from the Coast Guard will come from either Belle Isle or Marblehead. Yeah, so that's exactly what my kind of reaction was to at that time, because the boat that we have now could probably serve for a short period of time in assistance of waiting for, essentially a Toledo Station search and rescue team from the Coast Guard, responding right away. Whereas that's just not going to be the case. We learned during this meeting that the U.S. Coast Guard struggles with recruiting as well, as we all have seen across it. They've lost over a third of their department. They're trying to replace them. However, they've had to really kind of look at what they're going to do as far as the stations. And so this will allow them to fully complement Marblehead and Belle Isle. But that does come at the cost of essentially there's 5 different stations that become a scheduled mission station, and Toledo is one of those. So that puts us at a more need to be able to essentially be able to complete the entire mission, because that the time for response from Marblehead or Belle Isle is about an hour and a half to 2 hours on a good day. And we know that, usually these emergencies on the water don't happen on good days. So,
Thank you.
yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ackerman. Mr. Wallenzeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, where do you plan on docking this boat?
We actually are gonna, Mr. President, I'm sorry, Mr. Wallenzeck, we don't plan on docking it to be in the water at all times. We want to be, it'll be trailer.
And where are you going to put it in?
Well, that is, that is a conversation. Right now we would, right now it's up in Harbor View, where we would be, putting it in. But the reason why we want a trailer is because there's times where you can't get in there and we need to take it down to Mankey's or take it down, to another launch. So yes, it is something to consider.
Is there ever a time that it can go in at Harbor View?
Well, we
At
are
one point
looking
in time,
for.
that was a glorified jet ski ramp.
I know,
Mhm.
and our boat will go in there now, in a limited basis. And this boat that we would be looking for would be still also 2 outboard motors. And it would be a 29-foot boat, but that is something that we've been taking into consideration. We're just looking for something that has, the ability to have a more sustainable amount of individuals that can be on the rescue boat. But yeah, that might be something that we'll have to consider at the time, but I do believe the boat that we're looking at would be able to get in, up off of Bayshore.
And then with the Coast Guard changing their mission at Toledo Station and 5 other stations on the Great Lakes, have you looked at maybe acquiring one of their assets that they may no longer need?
That was the exact question I asked in the meeting and they laughed, just as they said, that everybody asks that same question in every meeting when they get this news. The Coast Guard does have, through GSA.
yeah.
And so we have looked through those. Where you can find the rescue boats that, what we're looking for would be in Hawaii. So the getting the boat from Hawaii.
on a trip?
They take the motors off of the boats as well. So we would have to get it transported from Hawaii to here. You could probably get it at a decent price, but you'd also still have the investment of the motors and stuff. With that being said, that might be something that would be a next effort if we weren't successful in this grant. This grant wouldn't pay for that to be done. But if we have to look at other options, it's certainly going to be something that we're really, really going to consider.
And did you consider docking at Maumee Bay State Park next to the sheriff?
So the only reason why we didn't consider there is we do cover the beach, but it's the time that we get there. A lot of times we have, a lot of the incidences directly out in the water. Ours is it would be to the west of Maumee Bay is where mainly our coverage is. That would be like Jerusalem's coverage area more over there. But we've really just kind of
Or
leaned
even,
on putting it in there.
Or dock it at Harborview Yacht Club, so you don't have to worry about running to a station and trailering it. You're
Mhm.
more capable of getting to an individual that's in need if it's already in the water. Am I correct?
You are correct. The only difference is that there is times, depending on what the emergency and where it's at, of where and how you can get out. So, and that's what we learned just in this last year, depending on if you have this easterly waters or winds, I should say, it'll blow the water right out where we don't have an option to be able to take it somewhere else on a trailer. And that's really why we've talked about leaving it on a trailer, responding it from the station, so we could pick the best available launch at that time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Council, anything additional? I've got a couple of questions, Chief. How many occurrences do we respond to on the water each year, typically? Your best guess would be.
And we just had that number. That's why but I would say anywhere between 15 and 20.
Okay, what is a typical call that we're responding to on the water?
A jet ski problem, an issue with, a motor not working, people, a distress. I think it just comes out as a distressed individual. So it varies on multiple different types of calls, but usually a distressed motor.
Okay, and so our need to have this boat would be to respond to those when the Coast Guard or the Sheriff's Department is not available or not able to respond, or response time would be limited or later.
So the U.S. Coast Guard wouldn't respond at all from the Toledo station. They would only respond
From the other two.
Yeah.
Right,
So that's what our response would be. Yep.
okay. And does Jerusalem have such a water response?
They do. They actually have, their boat is stored at, it's docked at Mankey Marina.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yep, it's around the corner from me. So is there an opportunity for us to utilize that of Jerusalem Township?
Jerusalem Township's boat, we do have a working relationship with them. We do have an automatic aid agreement on the water with them, for them to respond as well. Yep. So we both would respond for anything on the water.
Okay, and can't help but ask, but we were just talking about not having enough firefighters to man our equipment for a fire. How are you gonna get them out on a boat? If we don't have enough to respond to a fire, we're gonna buy a boat to put them out on the water. If we can't get them into an ambulance, how are you gonna get enough firefighters to get out on a boat and rescue? And the other side, to Mr. Wallenczak's point, why wouldn't you put it into a marina if response time is important? By the time you pick up a trailer, the guy who's trailered a boat, anybody else who has, it is not a fast thing to do. Pick up the boat, go drop it in the water, safely launch, 2-3 people there, go out and make your run. Your response time is not going to be incredibly better than an hour at best. So, I mean, I'm just looking at this, we're talking about budgets and everything else. And I hear 25% cost 75,000. I'm gonna guess we're gonna have to get at least 2 to 3 people captain's licenses. And I'm sure there's probably a more significant captain's license for a rescue operator. So we're probably 125,000 in to our boat for the rescues. Again, I'm just playing the devil's advocate here because all these things are wonderful and we always use the expression, but if it saves one life, but again, 125,000 of our cost into the boat, when you figure training and other things in there, plus continuous, plus the other things that are gonna have to go into the boat, well, there's a firefighter or two. Can we make use of what we got?
And I appreciate the
I can
devil's.
tell you because a 20-year-old boat, mine's 35. And it runs wonderfully every single day. And if you want, I just bought another one, so there'll be a 24-footer coming available if you're interested. But again, if we have a 20-year-old boat that gets used 15 times a year, even a $300,000 investment with us paying 1/4 of that with the training and everything else and a shortage of staff, I'm just challenged why we want to increase our ability to provide water rescue. Most boaters have a towing contract. They have an insurance contract. If they have breakdowns, issues, whatever it might be. If that boat is on fire on the water, you getting to a boat and getting out there is not the rescue that they need. It will be from the boats that are within a half-mile radius that will respond as soon as they see smoke. And there is a family akin of boaters. When there's a boater down, somebody's usually coming along to help. Jet ski breaks down, someone comes pull them in. Unless you're policing the harbor for reckless use of a jet ski, water rescue most times is done by those individuals who make it their profession coming out of the marinas. I tell you, coming out of Mickey's, there's 3 services: towboat, rescue boat. And like I said, if you see smoke on a boat, every boat around there swarms in to make sure everybody's okay, make sure everybody's out. There's always going to be emergency circumstances, but by the time you would trailer, take that out, get it in the water, make the response, you're going to be no less than an hour. I'd be amazed if you were. We're worried about 5 to 6 minutes in an emergency situation on land. An hour ain't going to make it on water in any case, regardless of what kind of boat that you have. I guess I'm just asking, I guess the question maybe some may have but wouldn't ask, is this money we need to spend? And could we redirect these in the priorities as we talk about? Can we make use of the 20-year-old boat for another 5 years? Let's go get some more bodies into the force. Just my thought.
So I do appreciate being the devil's advocate for sure. As far as welcome to the fire service, it's do more with less, and it's be the jack of all trades. And so when there's emergency, it happens, we have no choice. It doesn't matter if it's on the water or the land. So those same individuals that are on the ambulance, they're the ones that's getting on the boat. And then when the ambulance call comes in, that's when we don't have the people to go to that call. As far as an hour goes, the response, the boat's already on the trailer. It's already hooked up to the truck. It goes directly from station 1. It wouldn't take an hour to get in the water. It doesn't take an hour currently to get in the water with our current boat now. But there's only 2 people that are getting in that water. The boat doesn't hold air, so that it loses air every couple of days. The boat doesn't have air in the inflatables around it. We've looked to repair that to be able to put and fill with styrofoam. But then we had learned during that process that they just become waterlogged and then slow you down. Then we don't have a motor that is strong enough to be able to push that if that was to happen. As far as the redirection or the amount of working with Jerusalem covers over 200 square mile. And there's been times that our people have been closer to Canada than they have been to our own response area. So we have chose that because they are docked, we chose that we would be better to trailer for the purposes of getting into Harbor View and thinking that it's just straight up Wind Road and being able to put it in that location. And with the versatility of being able to take it to where we need to take it to have a quicker, it might be a longer response by vehicle to get it to the water, but then, maybe a shorter response on the water. And that's mainly simply because of the asset that we have currently right now. The asset that we have right now, when the Coast Guard says that we can send you a helicopter, I certainly appreciate that a helicopter would come out of Detroit, but a helicopter would probably sink our boat. Just because we wouldn't be able to, have the helicopter just directly above us. But that's essentially what they're telling us, is that we would get a helicopter out of Detroit. So we're just looking to try to be able to provide a better, to be able to provide the service on the water, but safely for everybody, safely for our membership, and also for the individuals that are in trouble. And I don't disagree with the fact that, a fire and local boaters in that area would all respond to help each other. But we also do look at the medical emergencies too, and trying to get those individuals. But yeah, this is a common question a lot of the times on the amount of use. And unfortunately, to that point, we just have to be prepared for all emergencies, no matter where it happens. And it just has to have the equipment. But just in assets in general, I will say that we have really kind of looked at our entire fleet and expect that we'll be talking about it more as we go to budget. But yes, we are going to reduce a lot of in that area. So we've been really looking at what is the priorities and where do those lie at. Port security grant only comes up one time a year. So that's why the ability of, maybe it's 75,000, but 75,000 on a $300,000 boat is a lot different than 75,000 on just a $75,000 boat. And it's just as simple of the capabilities on being able to what you can provide on the water. So it's just an opportunity. We're trying to look for whatever we can do to be as fiscally responsible as we can, but also meet the need of what the rescues are. So that's where we're at.
Very good. Thank you, Chief.
Yep.
Council, any additional questions? Hearing none, council, I'll seek a motion to move item 80 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
All right, seconded by Mr. Slander. We have a motion by Mrs. Paula, second by Mr. Slander to move item 80 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, any objections? Hearing none, item 80 of 2024 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on, we're going to item 81 of 2024. And this is presented by Mayor Michael Safarian and Building and Zoning Commissioner Stephen Schrake. Mr. Schrake, we're going to go straight to you.
Mr. President,
Yes.
we are one of just a couple communities in the surrounding area that has not adopted a property maintenance code. We believe that in order to ensure a safe and clean community, that we need to have the tools to enforce property maintenance. To the question that one of the gentlemen here spoke to earlier, we did make a point to indicate and add the paragraph under general scope and intent to refer back to what is defined as a public nuisance in section 1341.01, which is what guides all of our nuisance complaints. So that in of itself will help give us the administrative discretion as to the level of nuisance and that it affects the general public versus just a feud between neighbors.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Schrake. Anything additional from the administration, Mr. Mazur?
Yes, Mr. President. Obviously, this is something that we've been speaking about at length for several months, I would say, ever since Mr. Schrake got here, and even prior to that. And as the mayor pointed out to me at a few points during that process, there's a long history of I would say, implementing a property maintenance code, or at least the discussions about it. And this is something that's been out there for a long time. I do think that something like this is needed. The inspectors do need the tools to address the issues that are out in the community that we hear about from people. We get complaints about things, and a lot of times what they hear is there isn't anything in the code that addresses this. There's nothing we can do about it. and they just want action. So, and then, and they don't get it. So what they wind up doing is just living with the nuisance properties that are, that are near them. And it gets ignored for a long time. In my opinion, this is a great tool to use. And to this gentleman in front of us, has spoke to earlier, the concerns of using this code to be weaponized against neighbors. That is something that we've talked about, and I think that's what killed it. The chance to implement a property maintenance code for several years. And each time this has been brought up, weaponization of a property maintenance code for, neighbor feuds, was discussed. And that's what killed it each and every time. There is administrative discretion on how the code is applied. And the intent of the application of this code is to just go after the obvious violations, not for neighbors to nitpick on neighbors. And I've been in that situation before. And I've had in previous experiences elsewhere. And I've had to tell the ones that are calling in complaints, I just tell them, knock it off. And sometimes people just need that. Some people just need that. We're not doing anything about it, knock it off. Because it's not something that rises to the level of taking somebody to court over a flake of paint missing off on a house. But that's what we run into, and that's our job to address. So that's, my assurance to you and those that are in your situation, that the nitpicking won't happen. And that's something that we have to do a good job of, is managing and letting people know that, hey, this isn't something that we're going to enforce on. And that's what administrative discretion is, making sure that there isn't that abuse of using a code against another neighbor. So that's what I wanted to assure you and others that are in your situation. Mr. President, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor, do you have something to add? I see your light's green. I
would say we will try to do that. We find that those that are using that as a tool in their shed to attack their neighbor, they know the code better than anybody in the city. They will know it. They'll go over it with a microscope. And so some of that stuff you just can't eliminate. They will, it's going to happen. And we have to deal with the code we have, and we'll have it increase a little bit with an additional code. But it's hard to make an unreasonable person reasonable.
Yeah. Our hope is a common sense approach in the dialogue and discussion with it. I would add, just because I've been a part of these meetings and discussions, God, for going on 6 years, but I would say it was, 5-6 months ago when we really started talking about this again. And that has been a lot of the dialogue is how do we avoid this from becoming a weapon from one neighbor to another, but still being a valid and useful tool to the community. And also looking at it with not only what is the best thing for the community, but obviously we want to operate with a sense of compassion as well. Some remedies and fixes may not be immediately available to the individuals of a homeowner, whatever it may be. So it's really a common sense approach of trying to establish a set of parameters and governances to this, and then allowing administrative discretion into how to apply that. Very similar to what we do, if you will, with a police officer. If it's a 35-mile-an-hour zone and you're going 38 miles an hour, they could pull you over. They typically are not. So again, it's using discretion in situations of what is, I'll say, negatively impactful to the community versus, what is, you can tell, a feud more so than anything else. So I can just say from my time with this that I do believe we are very far down the road as far as discussing how to apply, how to utilize, and how to protect our community and not weaponize this. And I'm comfortable. I think this is a good tool for us as a city, and certainly keeps us in line with many of the cities around us who already have these in place. So, council, any questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
Mr. Schrake, I didn't see in here, maybe it's in here. I can't see real good sometimes. Is with the weeds, it talks about the weeds 10 inches. what is it when they get a letter, a homeowner, once you notify the homeowner? What's that process? And the dates between each letter you send?
Mr. President, Mr. Drake, yes, we would send out, the 10 inches is the basis that our code currently has before the property maintenance code. So it does align with our current zoning code. We would send them a letter of which they would have 5 days to rectify the situation or respond to us, after which time the city would go and mow the property, and that would be assessed on their property taxes. After which time, if there is a second or third violation in the future, we do not need to serve notice. We can just send out crews to go ahead and mow that, again, with city crews, and that would, the assessment would be placed on their property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Council, any additional questions on item 81?
Mr. President,
Ms. Ackerman?
that was funny because that was the same subject that concerned me. I've worked with other communities that have had this weeds be an issue, because weeds is a very broad term and everyone has a different definition of what a weed is. So I know, especially in Jerusalem Township, there were zoning wars or over pollinator patches and wildlife habitat areas. And so I was concerned with the language that it just says cultivated flowers and gardens. So if I would not want to punish someone that sets aside a small area in their yard for, pollinator or bird, things that plant, for plants that are beneficial. So I just, is there more language that goes with this? Because that is pretty, it doesn't encompass, those type of, like, if I have a milkweed patch in my yard, it's going to be, they're going to be 4 foot tall. But whether you consider them a noxious weed or not, I mean, that I don't want people to get, penalized if they have a wildflower area in their yard or something. Is there more language that we can add to this, or that you are aware of?
Mr. Ackerman, if I can, before you answer that, Mr. Shrake, and I'll ask you to speak a little bit to this too. There is a process. So when the landowner, homeowner would be notified of this, as he mentioned, they have 5 days to address that. Part of that would be if they called in and said, hey, wait a minute, that's a pollinator area. Let's talk through that. Don't just send out a crew to cut this down. That becomes part of that dialogue. Joel and Steve, if I remember in our conversations, that's what that 5-day period is for. That's why they're not just sending somebody out on a complaint that violates. It's, you got to give a little time for due process. My assumption is in that due process period of 5 days extending to 10 that we talked about, that's what takes place in those portions, so that those types of things can be reviewed as opposed to just being acted on. Am I stating that correctly? Does that make sense? Either Mr. Shrake or Mr.
Mr.
Mason.
President, Ms. Ackerman, that's the beauty of adopting a book like this, which is has been vetted and utilized all across this country.
By HOAs? No. I'm just-
No. HOAs are private. Those are private standards that are set by the homeowners association. This is completely different. This is part of a family of codes, such as the Ohio
Yeah.
Building Code, and all of the other codes that have been adopted by the state of Ohio come from the ICC family of codes. So they all integrate and mesh together. That is pertinent to how it's important to kind of utilize this code as written. Now, there is the book I have in front of me is not only the code, but also the commentary. And the commentary assists the code official in what was the intent behind the code section. And if you will entertain me, since the question about weeds has come up, weeds shall be defined as all grasses, annual plants, and vegetation other than trees and shrubs provided. However, this term shall not include cultivated flowers or gardens. Upon further failure of the owner or agent having charge of a property to cut and destroy weeds after service of notice of violation, they shall be subject to prosecution. Now, in the commentary, it goes a little further and it kind of explains what your concern is, Ms. Ackerman. And that is, all noxious weeds are prohibited. However, each community has different weeds that are considered noxious. The code official should confer with the state or local agricultural agent to become familiar with weeds that are noxious in his or her community. Cultivated flowers and gardens are not considered to be weeds. The word cultivated is important. Cultivation is defined as to loosen or dig soil around growing plants. Uncultivated gardens should be treated the same as weeds and tall grasses. So if it was purposeful, if it was planted, that would be considered cultivated. If it is just a free-for-all that happens to have some prairie grasses and natural habitat, it can still be considered noxious weeds and out of control growth. So the big difference is managed plant growth and unmanaged natural free-for-all. That's what we want to be able to regulate so that, again, someone can't just say, it's natural habitat, natural plants, so that's why I've let it grown this way. And we get complaints by neighbors who are saying, we have rodents coming in and out and so forth. So there's a difference between purposeful cultivation and not.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schrager. Mr. Mazur?
And again, this is something I've come across. So somebody who just lets their grass grow and says, well, it's wild, it's prairie land. That there's a difference. And then there's somebody who actually puts in a monarch way station, right? So like milkweed plants and others. So there's a difference, and that's where there's always this gray line. It's like this wide that you can't, one person's opinion, it's this and the other. So that's there's judgment calls on all these different codes all the time. So just know that the intent is not to go, I mean, if it's somebody that cultivates a prairie grass and it's, it's decent and they maintain it, it's the difference between somebody just letting their grass grow and throwing a bunch of wildflower seeds out and hoping for the best. You know what I mean? Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mazur. Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. And what I would say to the members of council and those that are sitting here listening, as we have gone through this dialogue over months and months, I would say, Mr. Reeves, if you would agree, Mr. Schrager and Mr. Mazur have basically asked to live in God's green little acre moving forward, because they will be the keepers of that gray area, and that gray area is going to be large, and they will live right in the middle of that with all these calls, and we do appreciate their
Mr.
service, and
President?
we also trust in their ability to handle that. So, Mrs. Ackerman?
I'm sorry, but Mr. Reeves believes in scorched earth. He confessed to running his wife's flowers over. I'm not sure he can be entrusted with gardens. I'm just teasing, Terry.
And that's one way to not have to plant the flower garden next year, right? There you go. All right, council, any additional questions on item 81 of 2024?
Mr. President, one
Mr.
quick
Drake.
one. Thanks, Mr. Herrick. It's talks about public toilet facilities. Says they must meet Ohio Plumbing Code. Third line, 502.5. it, would a porta-john be considered a public toilet if it's on a right-of-way?
Mr. Schrake? Whoever may be the keeper of such information,
Mr. President,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Drake, I'm looking at that section right now. The purpose of this section are to establish minimum maintenance provisions for public toilet facilities and to ensure the availability of these facilities to the public at all times that the building is occupied. It is not necessarily intended to address temporary public toilet facilities such as porta-johns, et cetera. It would only be if the city, say, had public restrooms available at the rec center, that we would have to maintain or keep them relatively sanitary and clean. If there are any modifications that are required, just as any public facility, they would need to meet the plumbing code.
Okay, because you do remember when that happened not too long ago on Van Buren.
I'm sorry, I'm not,
They had the cones on the sidewalk. Then the porta-john
Oh,
was
yes.
right on the curb and butted up to the sidewalk.
correct. So your question is,
I'm just pointing it out. I've seen that. I thought, what if, because I know one of the neighbors down the street called me numerous times, and I was worried they were gonna, when they got rid of that porta-john, do the same thing just to do it well. We looked at that toilet for 2 weeks. Now you're gonna look at it for a month.
well, Mr. Drake, that was not, sorry, Mr. President, Mr. Drake, that was not considered a public toilet facility. That was a private facility for the contractors who were building that home. And we did notify them that they needed to keep the sidewalk clear, but we can't prevent them from providing facilities for the workmen during construction. When we spoke with the complainant, she indicated that the toilet facility was not her issue. Her issue was just the blocking of the sidewalk with the cones. So those were moved, I believe by you, but
I moved it.
but we were addressing that. And then after the construction was done, the porta-john was removed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. And just to clarify, so more or less a one-off situation. That was where the Habitat for Humanity house
Correct.
was going in. Very good. Council, any additional questions? Hearing none, council, I will seek a motion to move item 81 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Seconded by Mr. Wallenzak. So we have a motion by Mr. Reeves, second by Mr. Wallenzak to move item 81 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 81 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on to item 82, I believe 82, 83, 84, Mr. Schrake, are all yours. Do you want to speak to all these together, go one after the other? Or do you want to hit them one at a time?
Whatever is your pleasure, Mr. President.
I would say go ahead and talk through all three of them because I think these are, do the first two. We'll come back to the third individually. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. The next one is to amend chapter 1155.04, private swimming pools, and declaring an emergency. The current code section for private swimming pools has not been in line with the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code published by the ICC, which has been updated over time in response to, unfortunately, tragedies. Oregon has experienced a number of tragedies last year. So that caused me to take a look at what we have on the books and see if there's any language that could be helpful to prevent any future tragedies, as well as be more in alignment with the current codes published for spas and swimming pools. So the biggest change is in number 8, where there are times that swimming pools are also located in agriculture properties that are used as a dwelling. Since Oregon is a unique community where we have a mixture of both ag and residential side by side, and they may be even abutting one another and used the same way, all as residential. We've added that the fence shall be a non-climbable permanent barrier, so as not to have any temporary barriers that can collapse. And they would also have to have gates or doors that are self-closing and self-latching. Oftentimes, people don't, in their joy of enjoying their pool, not think about, oh, I need to make sure that the gate is closed when I go in and get a sandwich, or when I go in to use the restroom. So it needs to be self-closing, self-latching. There are specifics that directly came from the International Spa and Swimming Pool and Spa Code about how those gates are to operate. The other portion that was modified is the section about what kinds of fences would be permitted. So again, bringing in the language of non-climbable, permanent, but also a pool safety barrier is compliant mesh fencing with gates that meet a specific ASTM standard. Those would also comply with creating a safe environment for a body of water such as a swimming pool. We've eliminated combination of landscape mounds, shrubs, and trees. A mound is not going to stop a child from getting to a pool. That, I believe, was just an anomaly that was intended for ponds and not properties with active built swimming pools. So that has been corrected. And then we've added that required permits, all required permits for all swimming pools and ponds, including plumbing, HVAC, electrical, site drainage, and permanent fence, must be issued prior to the installation of the pool or pond. That is all the changes that were made.
Very good. Council, any questions on item 82 of 2024?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
Mr. Schrake, it talks about 9 non-climbable permanent barrier. Would a chain link fence be considered climbable?
Mr. President.
Go ahead.
Mr. Drake. There are 2 types of chain link fence meshes. If the opening is smaller than 4 inches, the tighter mesh, then that would be considered non-climbable. But if it is larger, then a child could get their feet and their hands in that and use it to climb. In those situations, they should then have slats put into the chain link fence. Often you see those as privacy slats, and that would prevent them from being climbed. This is really important to also the pool owner, because if they do not take certain precautions to safeguard the swimming pool, and if some child were to get into their pool area and drown, they could be held liable in civil court for that death of that child. So it's very important that people understand this is not just to protect the children, but also the homeowner or the pool owner, so that they can say they've made as the necessary modifications or the necessary safety precautions to prevent an accident from occurring.
Okay. My main concern would be that a kid would climb over the fence
Mhm.
into the yard.
Mr. Drake, Mr. President, Mr. Drake, there is always that possibility. However, again, the international code addresses all of the scenarios that are possible. And so if they are at least meeting those minimum standards, then that is what is necessary from a legal standpoint. But yes, you could have children that are creative. It could be a non-climbable fence, but they could find a chair and drag it to the fence and then climb, utilize the chair. They could do a lot of different things that could override the basic safety measures. But again, there's a line that you have to draw, and this is that line that we're drawing. Right now, we don't have a strong enough code section to address every scenario. This is the first step to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Council, any additional questions on item 82? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 82 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second?
Seconded by Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Mr. Reeves, seconded by Mr. Drake to move item 82 of 2024 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 82 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on to item 83. Again, we'll go to you, Mr. Straight.
Mr. President, this is a very simple modification. I found that the section on accessory buildings was very confusing. This does not change the intent of it. It just helps clarify when an accessory building is permitted, and that is when a primary structure exists, then an accessory structure can be added, but an accessory structure cannot be placed on a vacant piece of property where there's no primary structure. Section D was where the confusion came in, and it had the term without, which would conflict with what it was saying in section A. So this was intended for allowing someone to proceed with the accessory structure while the main structure was under construction.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Straight. Council, any questions on item 83?
Mr. President,
Ms. Ackerman.
would they be allowed to ask for a variance on that?
I believe they would, Mr. Straight.
Mr. President, Ms. Ackerman, yes, as all sections in the zoning code, any item can be appealed to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Straight. Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Council, any additional questions on item 83? Hearing none, I'll seek a motion to move item 83 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Drake. We have a second. Moved by Mr. Reeves, seconded by Mr. Drake to move item 83 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 83 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving on to item 84 of 2024. Mr. Strake will ask you to go into this, and this is regarding short-term rentals, or what most of us would know as an Airbnb. So, Mr. Strake.
Thank you, Mr. President. This section is to be added in, and this would be addressing the short-term rentals, which often we know as Airbnb, but also other platforms, including Swimply, which is where you're renting out your swimming pool. So as many options that can be thought of, the wonderful world of the internet has figured out a way to capitalize on it. Without regulation, we will be easy pickings for those operations. Most of the surrounding communities already have legislation regarding short-term rentals, prohibiting them or creating a registration. Currently, Ohio has not addressed it specifically from a statewide standpoint, and so each municipality must do that on their own. What we have opted for is a registration so as not to outright prohibit it, because I'm not quite sure of the legal ramifications of an outright prohibiting of these businesses. But if there is regulation, if it is managed and is safe and is not a nuisance to the neighboring community, then they should be able to operate safely and without any concern. This would include limits on parking and limits on, which would break down the ability for someone to from renting a house and then turning it into their party house for the weekend. The operator would need to be close by and be able to respond to emergencies, to shut it down, et cetera. And if you have an operator that is not following the rules for their license to operate, they would not be able to renew their license, and their license also could be revoked. So with that, it gives us the tools to allow those that are being responsible to conduct business, but those that are not responsible not to. As for HOAs, HOAs may specifically restrict or prohibit, but that would be up to each of the HOAs to add that to their regulations.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Schrake. Council, any questions on item 84?
Mr. President.
Mr. Walter?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Schrake, I have two points of interest here. Is there any desire for us as a city to limit the number of registrations and put a cap on them? And the second part of that is, can we control the density of them? So therefore, like Mr. Belli has come in here where they're going to have 5 or 6 of them all on his street, which is less than a quarter-mile street. So
Mr.
what's the
President.
appetite of the city for that?
Mr. Wolanzak, I believe both of those are valid options that we can include in the ordinance. I believe that density is important because if you get a series or a street that is owned by one individual who has purchased up the properties and then decided that they're just going to rent them all out for short-term rentals, that could be a problem for those that are there long-term. So density is a very good idea. The other is having a number or cap. The issue there is, what is that magical number going to be? And is it by region or area within the city? Because you may have more nearer the water, because that's what people want to use for vacations and such. Or would you just have a number cap for the whole city?
Well, the number cap would be directly tied to the density of them. If you say there's 1 per quarter mile as a crow flies, or whatever limit that we set, therefore you would control you wouldn't be able to put 20 of them off of Bay Shore Road, because 20 of them would be within a mile of each other. So I believe that's something that we should look for, and I would hope that council would concur with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walzak. Thank you, Mr. Schrake. I would just comment for myself. I believe that that warrants a conversation. I don't see that in here. I'll open up to other council members, but I have one question of my own, but
Mr. President?
yes, Mr. Slander.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would this be backtracked, then it would cover the existing ones then as well? I mean, it kind of goes in line with what you're saying there, I guess, but, would this cover the existing ones as a whole, or would there be any grandfathering?
Go ahead, Mr. Schrake.
Mr. President, Mr. Salander, I believe that this would be moving forward because it would require an annual registration. So any pre-existing ones would be able to make it through to the end of the calendar year, but then they would have to register and go through the process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slander. Thank you, Mr. Schrake. Council, any additional questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Drake.
this might, well, Melissa isn't here. Mr. Schrake, do you know if could the city, or is it up to the person who owns that house? Would they be the enforcer of this rule? I know we've rented houses before, and I believe we had to, everybody over 18 had to send like a copy of their identification to the property owner. They asked how many people were coming and the number of vehicles that would be there, because I don't know if it was the city that enforced it, or if it's up to the homeowners to have something like that in place. You know, where you don't say, my wife and I are gonna stay there for a week and you got 50 people staying there.
Go ahead, Mr. Drake.
Mr. President, Mr. Drake, the application that is submitted by the operator, and the operator is broadly defined as the owner, leasee, or otherwise. So if they're leasing the home or if they own the home, but they choose to operate it as a B&B or other short-term rental, they would have to make application. And at that time, they are attesting to certain information such as proof of general liability, local contact person, site plan, and so forth. And they are required to keep a record of all of the, they have operating requirements that they are signing, that they are agreeing to. It's a contract with the city and with the zoning department. And if they fail to follow any portion of the contract that they signed, then they could have their license revoked. Parking is one of those items. They also must keep the identity of the person responsible for booking the short-term rental and keep that record on file for 3 years. We don't want to be the keeper of all their records, but they must have those available for our review if we request them. So if they've had a rental for 5 years with no issues, and we ask that we would like to see their records from the past 3 years, they would need to provide that.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Thank you, Mr. Drake. It's a little tricky, doesn't it? Council, any additional questions on item 84? The question I would have, Mr. Schrick, as we propose this and move this forward, I guess we would almost need to pull, Mr. Walzak shared the concern about density and enumeration of how many in the city based on that density. Is it best to remove this for reconsideration and walk it on next week, or represent 2 weeks from now, or do we amend in some manner now? I don't know that we are educated and aware enough of trying to amend that now. Would we move this forward with the likelihood that we would do that, or would you recommend that we pull this back for reconsideration, either walked on next week or at the committee of the whole in 2 weeks?
Mr. President, I would think that that is something that we can work out in the next week. so that we can keep this moving forward. If we pull it and then resubmit it at the next committee of the whole, we've lost about a month. And we are getting into the season, which people are going to start wanting to rent their facility. And as I had mentioned earlier, the grandfathering of it would allow them to go through this season without registration. So the sooner we get it enacted, the better.
Very well. Thank you,
Mis-
Mr. Schrake.
Mr. President?
Mr. Walzak.
Could we then put a provision in that this takes effect upon signing?
We can, or it can be declared an emergency.
Or it takes effect within 30 days, so people that are going to operate this year still have to register?
Yeah, I mean, you could put an activation date, if you will, of 30 days from our vote in a typical ordinance passing, which would give 30 days notice to those individuals operating Airbnbs to submit, but you'd have to be very ready with your process, ready for that 30 days.
I think, Mr. President, we could do that, or you could also do, whether it's 30-day or 60-day, we would have to develop the application form yet and so forth.
And I'm sure that's floating around someplace, and we don't have to
I'm sure.
reinvent the wheel.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I would think if we're, at May 6th today, voting on it on the 23rd, that would enact that into June 13th. You're still prior, at least to the summer holidays. At least we know who's doing what where, by and large. So with the opportunity, I guess I'd say of item 84, with the opportunity of a density provision included in a window of 30 days past our approval vote, which I assume that goes that way, that's when we would enact and start that. Is that fair, Mr. Walzak?
That was my assumption. That's what I was hoping for.
Okay. So based on that information and considerations, is there a motion to move item 84 of 2024 to next week's agenda as discussed in the last moment or two?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Walzak. Seconded by Mr. Reeves. Motion by Mr. Walzak, seconded by Mr. Reeves, move item 84 to next week's agenda. Counselor, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 84 is moved to next week's agenda. Moving forward to item 85, presented by Mayor Michael Sfarian and Police Chief Brandon Began. And Chief, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Mayor and Mr. President. This is our standard vehicle fleet maintenance contract for the year. What's not standard about it is that we're starting at pretty much mid-year. The reasoning behind that was we entered into a contract with AAA Auto for our auto maintenance for the year 2024 with an optional second year. Very early into that contract, pretty much within the first few weeks of going to them, we experienced multiple problems. They were using parts that were not Ford parts, manufacturer parts. There was all kinds of issues with timeframes of getting vehicles back. Things that they had promised us that didn't go through. On multiple occasions, we went to them with our concerns with it. We were told that they were going to fix it. It continued to get worse. We eventually ended up giving them notice after speaking with our law director that they were in violation of the contract on multiple occasions and that we were going to terminate that contract with a 30-day notice. Working with AAA through the notification, they said it was best for both the city and for them to discontinue that immediately. So Bauman Auto, we've used them in years past. They do a great job. They're the local Ford dealership. They've actually carried on our service, even though we didn't have the contract with them since all this stuff happened with AAA. So they've been taking care of us. We put it out for a new request for proposal that was due back last Wednesday. And Bauman was the only company that put in a proposal to us. So that's what we're bringing forward. We've been very happy with them over the years. They really stepped up in this time frame where AAA discontinued their service of our vehicles. So we believe that it's the best and only bid that came in. So we'd like to bring that forward.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. Council, any questions on item 85? Hearing none, I'll seek a motion to move item 85 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Solander. Thank you. We have a motion by Mrs. Paula, second by Mr. Solander to move item 85 to next week's agenda. Council, any objections? Hearing none, item 85 is moved to next week's agenda. Item 86, Chief, we'll go back to you on this for the bulletproof vest.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is our yearly grant that we will be putting in for. This grant is through the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation. They will cover 75% of our bulletproof vests that we purchase for our officers. The current bulletproof vest that we have, it's on a 5-year rotational. So every 5 years, the vests essentially expire and we have to get new vests for the officers, as well as any new officers that we may bring on. We outfit them with the bulletproof vest. And so this program is better than the federal grant that we used to do, which was 50% of the vest cost. They cover 75% with a 25% match. So we think it's the best. We used it last year, and this is just to apply for the grant and if accepted, to accept the grant funds.
Very good. Thank you, Chief Beacon. Council, any questions on item 86? Mr. Slander, do you have a question?
No.
Oh, no. Okay. Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to move item 86 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Ms. Paula.
so moved.
Thank you, Ms. Paula.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Slander. Thank you. We have a motion by Mrs. Paula, second by Mr. Slander, to move 86 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 86 is moved to next week's agenda. Last but not least on the agenda, Mr. Borton, thank you for being patient. We were presented by Mayor Michael Saparian and Parks and Recreation Commissioner Tim Borton, item 87.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for the pickleball project. We're moving forward. If you remember in January, we discussed the possible lighting of the courts. So we said we would go out and get bids for that, and that's what we've gotten. And from the bids we received, Westfield Electric was the lowest best bid at the $156,450.
Thank you, Mr. Borton. Council, any questions? Hearing none, I will seek a motion to move item 87 of 2024 to next week's agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Seconded by Mr. Drake. We have a motion by Mr. Reeves, seconded by Mr. Drake to move item 87 to next week's agenda. Council, are there any objections? Hearing none, item 87 is moved to next week's agenda. Council, that concludes all the items we have for consideration this evening. We'll move on to the mayor's report. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President, but I have no report.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Mazer.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Mazer. Mr. Roman. Thank you, Mr. Roman. Mr. Reeves.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Wallenczak. Thank you, Mr. Wallenczak. Ms. Ackerman.
I wanted to ask the Mayor Safarian if he is ready to appoint someone to the tree commission yet.
I didn't think of that yet, no.
Oh, we haven't had a council member since Mr. Zale left office.
What's that?
So we haven't had a council member on the tree commission
There's
since.
no one on it.
I know, but for the for Tree City USA, for us to get a growth award, we're supposed to have an elected official on there. So if you'd please consider, if I would like to do it, but if Mr. Drake would like to do it, or anybody else on council, I'd appreciate if you could appoint someone.
If you want to be on it, you can be the tree commission person. I'll make that appointment next week at the council meeting.
Thank you. And I'm disappointed that Mr. Mazer didn't jump up and down, get excited about attending the opening ceremony for the biggest week in birding. I really thought that was a highlight of his life. But no, I did appreciate that he attended that with me. And I know some people also, other council people wanted to do it, but they were out of town or unavailable. But We had the governor's office, a rep from the governor's office, and Vance's office, and Brown's office were there. City of Toledo was represented, and the Lake Erie Shores and Islands, and other cities, and made a good connection with the mayor of Oak Harbor to start working on an ordinance to try to help with the feral cat population. They were successful in passing something, so I'm looking forward to meeting with them. If anybody else is interested in that, please let me know. But yeah, if you get a chance, get out. I've seen lots of warblers. If I'm a geek out for a second, but if you get a chance, go over and check out the board at Maumee Bay State Park of all the birds that are seen moving through during this migration. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Ackerman. Mr. Slander.
No report, Mr. President. Just a couple quick things. One, just want to welcome the birders also. And the other is, I did get a chance over the last weekend to be able to see Oregon Community Theater's performance of I Love You, Perfect Now Change. And they have two more chances if you haven't seen it. So it is, it was quite an amazing performance and just well done by our local theater. So that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Slander. Mr. Drake.
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. Ms. Polliff.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for being patient with me. I had the Safety Committee meeting. I think it was a good meeting. I really do appreciate all of your inputs, even yours, Mr. Drake. Thank you. But I really do. We had a good conversation, and I look forward to more conversations throughout the year about it. And I'm looking forward to moving forward, hopefully having something within the next week of getting those positions set up for the fire department. So thank you for all your time with that. And that ends my report.
Thank you, Ms. Polliff. And council, I have nothing from my standing committee. I do want to thank everybody for their time and involvement, not only tonight, but in other nights with safety and many other committees. A lot of very significant things coming down the pike, but I do appreciate everybody's conversation. With that, I will seek a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Mr. Reeves.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Drake. Council, any objections? Meeting is adjourned.